So today we are joined by Kate Stewart and Jamie Griffith, a mother and son who experienced Jamie's transition together. Hi, guys. I would just love for our guests to first share your pronouns. Mine are on the screen. I use she, her. And the first time you saw trans identity represented in popular culture.
Hi, I'm Kate, she, her pronouns. And actually, Silence of the Lamb, that might have been my first one too. But then what I actually thought of was The Crying Game and the character of Dill in The Crying Game. That's what stuck with me. Jamie?
My name is Jamie. I use he, him pronouns. And I think the first representation of like an explicitly trans person that I saw in pop culture was probably Laverne Cox's character on Orange is the New Black.
I'm wondering if you would be able to share a bit about your experience as a trans youth and as a parent, going through this brave journey and coming to where you are now.
Like, as someone who came out as a young person and transitioned in high school, it's really hard to separate like what we could consider like to be like my gender transition from just like the experience of like growing up and forming an identity. But I think that one thing that particularly characterized the sense of like medical transition and seeking medical care and outside help is how challenging it is for young people for us to just talk about our bodies and our experiences with peers, in relationships with our parents anyway. Like, that's an awkward thing to talk about your body and like the things that your friends are doing as, a 14, 15, 16-year-old or as a middle schooler, and then to have, sort of the added stigma that surrounds transition. I think it can be really difficult to open those conversations with parents, and I am really grateful that I think like I have always had the privilege of having a really open relationship with my mom, so that made conversations around transition, whether it was social and like wanting to go by a different name and pronouns, or whether it was medical, seeking like hormone replacement therapy and top surgery. It allowed me to come in with a base level of comfort. But I know that like even I was pretty uncomfortable at times just trying to find the language to describe my body and talk about it with someone who you don't necessarily like always feel comfortable talking about your body because you're an adolescent.
And I say, as a mom, as Jamie was going through his sort of gender affirmation process, there's just a lot of emotions, and allowing myself to feel those was really important. I think at first there was, the fear, quite frankly, just fear of the unknown, that our family was changing and not knowing what that change would actually be like was a big part of it. There's also this fear because, no matter how loving your family is or your community is, being trans is hard in our world. And that's why we're all here today. And so as a parent, anything that's going to make your child's life harder is really hard for you. And then there was the guilt, honestly, when Jamie told me, of thinking like, oh, should I have known this sooner? Like, should I have seen something? Because would it have been easier if he had transitioned earlier in adolescence? And so there was that. But I have to say, going through all of those emotions and acknowledging them were far surpassed by the love and happiness of when seeing Jamie really just come into himself and be himself. I know for many families, like not knowing where this is going can be scary, but you also have to ask the question of what happens if your child doesn't do this? And honestly, like, after even starting the hormones, and particularly after the top surgery, and again, everybody has to go on their own journey and know when things are right for them. But I think the best thing in my life as a parent was that first summer going to the beach and seeing how happy Jamie was, like playing in the water, being with his sister, and just being free.
It's so wonderful. How was your experience when you and Jamie were first starting this process from the parent lens? Was there anything that surprised you when you guys went in for the first time?
No, not the first time. I mean, I'll say what probably leading up, I don't know if it was years or before Jamie talked to us about wanting to transition. I think that was the harder part because we saw, he wasn't happy with who he was. And so as a parent, that was really hard to see your child trying to figure things out and watching them and giving them the space to do that. And at the same time, not quite knowing exactly like where things were going. And I think when he sat us down and talked to us about changing his name, his pronouns, and wanting to go see a doctor and explore hormone therapy, then it was like things just, at least for me, started to click into place, because it was like, oh, all right, like this is. And he came to us with, I don't know if you did actually a PowerPoint, but it was pretty close to it in terms of a like, here's what, here's the printout, here's like what I think we need. And we were incredibly lucky to find great doctors. And like that to me is like, I cannot imagine having gone through this as a family without having an amazing set of doctors that we were able to find along the way. It makes a world of difference.
I would love to hear from you. What would be your top recommendations for really how to create a strong family support system, for trans kids and youth? What does that look like to you guys?
Part of it is just being a good parent and listening to your child. And I'd lay on two more things to that. One is realize that this is not about you as a parent. It's just, if you get your feelings hurt because your child decided to go talk to aunt or so-and-so or a cousin, and that was the first person they confided in, as Jamie said before, sometimes we don't have good shared language around these issues. And so you got to get over yourself a little bit and just be happy that they were able to find that other person to share that with and have that conversation. And so as you're going through this, put your own ego aside and realize this is really about your child and what they need. And then the other thing is, don't expect your child to be the expert overnight, even though like they come prepared and they know a lot, but they're not necessarily the expert on everything then trans. And so, and that's like, and they don't want, I speak for Jamie, but he can say this if he wants, but like every conversation your family has doesn't then have to revolve around that. And so I think, as adults, we also have to know, like, we can get on Google, we can get on the internet too, and get some answers and have conversations with our kids. But it's important that we're also not falling into that, like every conversation then we have, we're expecting them to provide us with all the answers as well. So.
I love you, Kate. You're awesome. Jamie, do you have anything to add to that?
I think kind of relating to what my mom said, both then and before about fear, I think also understanding that while when it comes to transition, the stakes can feel like incredibly high, because, as like the decision to come out as trans, to transition in any way that looks like for you, does come with a lot of implications in terms of social status and physical safety. But I think a lot of times they get caught up in sort of the fear of like dealing with transness, and particularly I think when it comes to transition, this fear of like the stakes must be so high because I'm so afraid of it, that like were my child to like change their mind, were they to have different thoughts, or just like every young person is like be confused, find misinformation, like that could be the end of the world. And I think challenging parents to and healthcare providers and teachers to kind of take a step back, and realize that this like fear of transness that we have is because we have a society that is transphobic, but not because that there's anything inherently bad with gender nonconformity or indecision. You know, and if ultimately someone decides that hormones for just a year is what they need, or you know, that they need different supports than they thought they did originally, then that's like not the end of the world, and it's no reason to not trust your child in the future, or trust your student, or the person that you're a care provider for.
When kids or young people are at the beginning of their journey, and to our perception it seems like they don't know what they want, or we regard them as maybe like shifting their perception of their identity. So how do you navigate that, and you know, how do you sort of live with it, I guess, in a world where we want absolutes and that kind of thing?
Well, I think first that you have to live with the fact that the world isn't about absolutes or certainties. And I think it's, as Rob and I talked about before, you know, we're talking about being, you know, a provider for a trans child or a parent. And the fact is like, you know, there's so many things we face as being a parent that either may change or may challenge us to think about differently. And this is just, you know, this is not every child, you know, goes through this, but there are so many things our children go through as they're growing up. And I think we need to approach it the same as we would other situations. And, you know, I mean, it's a little different because of course, the stigma and everything else around in the world, but it's just, you know, those skills and those things about being a good parent, really listening, letting your child lead, and putting front and center, like their happiness is really important.